is Eddie Graham doing our old history with Terry Santos. And we're doing it for the National Museum of the Pacific War. And we're in the Minger Hotel in San Antonio, Texas. Mr. Santos, tell us, when and where were you born?
I was born October the 10th, 1921, in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Okay. And could you give us the name of your parents?
Yes, my father's name was Anthony Santos, and my mother's name was Mary Reyes.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No.
Do you have any children?
Yes, I have two.
Would you please give us their names?
My son is Denny M. Santos, and my daughter is Terry A. Santos.
Okay. Let us start out with asking you, where were you and what were you doing on December 7th, 1941?
On December the 7th, when I first heard about Pearl Harbor, I was asleep. I was just awakened. The announcement of Pearl Harbor was made. And so, of course, I sat there and listened to the radio, see what was happening, and realized that we were at war.
Where were you at?
I was in San Francisco.
Okay. And after that, kind of tell us what happened to you up to... Okay, if you would, tell us what happened after that you ended up being in the military.
Well, then I volunteered for the Army, and went through infantry basic, and then after basic training, I saw a sign on the bulletin board saying that they were looking for volunteers for the newly activated Airborne units with paratroopers.
Okay, you did join the Army, I'm assuming,
yeah,
is that correct?
Yeah.
And where did you do your basic training?
I did my basic training at Fort Ord, California.
California. All right, good. All right, tell us what happened then after you read this poster.
Well, I went up to the first sergeant's office and said I'd like to volunteer for the newly activated paratroop unit. And he looked at me and he said, "You're crazy." And I said, "Well, I may be crazy, but I'd still like to volunteer." So he said, "Well, I don't think you'll qualify, but I'll put your name down."
What was the reason he didn't think you'd qualify?
Well, for one thing, I was thinner than I weighed about 128 pounds, and I didn't realize it then, but he knew that the minimum requirement was 130 pounds. And so anyway, after much back and forth, he said, "Well, if you're crazy enough, I'll put you down." So I was accepted. I went through parachute training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and then after I completed my parachute training, I saw a sign that said volunteers wanted for the newly formed paraskier unit, which at that time was the 10th Mountain Division, being formed up at Camp Carson, Colorado, which today I'm sure is Fort Carson, Colorado. And the 10th Mountain Division is now in Afghanistan. But their home base is Fort Drum, New York. So I thought, well, gee whiz, they want paratroopers, and they'll teach you to ski, because they were looking for paraskiers. Because apparently the Norwegians and the Finns, they had a lot of luck with paraskiers, and so did the Germans. So I volunteered for that, but before I heard whether I would be accepted, another call came up for volunteers for special warfare training. So I volunteered for that too. So I figured whichever came up first, so I'd go. Well, as it turned out, since the 10th Mountain Division was being newly activated, I was called in for special warfare training.
Let's go back a little bit. Something just dawned on me. You said when you volunteered, the sergeant knew that you wouldn't qualify because you didn't weigh enough. What happened that you got by that extra problem?
Well, yeah, well, I should have elaborated, but you have to go through a physical, before they should send you out. So I went through a physical, and sure enough, I weighed 128 pounds. And so the doctor said, are you really serious about wanting to become a paratrooper? And I said, yes. But I said, so he said, you realize the minimum weight is 130, and you only weigh 128. Yeah, but suppose I have my clothes on. What would I weigh? He said, oh yeah, you'd weigh 130. I said, well, why don't you weigh me with my clothes? So which he did. He was, so he put me down as 131.
Okay, good. That was a good part. That's really interesting part. Go ahead now and continue where you were at when I interrupted.
Oh, well, so this call for special warfare training came up before the 10th Mountain Division called for ski training. So then, and that's where I went. I went to, Quantico, Virginia, for this special training, where we took, we had to study semaphore, Morse code, learn sailing, and all of this. And so I thought, well, gee, this is interesting. So at that time, why we were practice sailing. We had to learn how to navigate and how to sail on Chesapeake Bay, but the water was so rough that they suspended the sailing portion of it, and after the rest of the training was completed, they sent us out to Presidio, Monterey, where we sailed on Monterey Bay. So that was pretty good duty.
Just out of curiosity, why was you needing to know sailing?
They didn't tell us. We had to learn how to sail. We had to learn how to navigate. So I suspect that what they had in the back of their minds was probably send us in the South Pacific someplace and drop us off and perhaps use a boat to sail from island to island or whatever they had in their mind. They never explain all these things. They have someone that they hope to train, and they just tell you do this, you do this, and that's exactly what we did. So I became quite proficient at sending and receiving Morse code, the semaphore, the flags, and sailing and navigating. And so then after I completed the sailing course, that completed my training. And so I reported back to Fort Benning. But so then they assigned me to the newly formed 11th Airborne Division. And I stayed on their roster, although I went overseas before the 11th did. And then I volunteered for Alamo Scout training, and that was a specialized group, which is today a part of the Green Berets, and that's why I had this Special Forces tab. But anyway, as I said, I volunteered for almost anything and everything as long as it was interesting and it wasn't KP or guard duty. And so then I completed the Alamo Scouts training, and you receive a certificate of completion.
Can you give us some detail on what training that was?
Yeah, it's jungle training where you learn to live off the land and how how to get about in the jungles and plus hand-to-hand combat. And you had to, in order to qualify, you had to be proficient in all infantry weapons. That's small arms. Yeah. From 45 to a machine gun. among other things. But anyway, the qualification requirements were quite stringent. And as I say, I volunteered for these offbeat things for a simple reason. I want to know if I'd qualify, and B, if I qualified, if I'd be picked, and C, if I was picked, would I complete? So fortunately, I was able to. I was young and foolish, I guess. I was
You like the challenge.
Yeah, I was able to complete. I was accepted for everything I volunteered, and I was able to complete those courses. So then, the 11th Airborne went overseas to the South Pacific, and since I was already carried on their roster, I went back into the 11th Airborne after my Alamo Scouts training, and General Swing, the commanding general of the 11th Airborne Division, formed up a provisional reconnaissance platoon. And the reason it was called provisional was because, well, first, by provisional, by definition, means temporary or conditional. And so that means that this platoon had no table of organization or equipment, or what is commonly called TOE in the Army. And so, of all the volunteers, 35 were selected to form up this platoon, and the platoon leader was Lieutenant Polka. And so once again I was selected, and so I served with the recon platoon throughout the war. As a matter of fact, I was a lead scout throughout combat.
Point man?
Always point man. But anyway, so then of course the highlight of the 11th Airborne's combat period was the liberation of the internees at Los Baños internment camp, which was located at that time approximately 25-30 miles behind Japanese lines. And so our job was to the division's task was to liberate these 2,147 internees incarcerated, mostly civilians, mostly Americans, but there were Canadians, English, Australians, Norwegians, various other European nationals, and so many of them are, or their kin are here, and so our platoon leader was Lieutenant Scow, and Lieutenant Scow was given the task of reconnoitering the area around the internment camp and select a drop zone. A drop zone is where paratroopers can land, and a beach landing zone. And so he always took me along because I could speak Tagalog, the native language.
Is that the native language of the Philippines?
Yes, so that was the national dialect of the Philippines, although they had several thousand other dialects. So he and I took a banca. Banca is a larger dugout canoe with outriggers and sails, and we sailed across Laguna de Bay, landed at a barrio on the opposite shore called Nanhaya. And from there we went overland about 10 miles to near the prison camp. And so our task was to find a suitable drop zone and a suitable beach landing zone.
While you were making your way through there, did you sometimes encounter any Japanese troops?
Oh, we had to make sure that they had patrols and things, but we had to make sure that we weren't detected. And so it's much easier for two men to remain undetected than a larger force. So when we determined what would be a suitable drop zone, which was about 900 yards from the encampment itself and the beach landing zone, then we walked back to this barrio, Nanhaya, and took a bunker back towards our lines and reported to then Colonel Mueller, today's retired General Mueller. And so then we went back to Nichols Field in Fort McKinley, where we were engaged in heavy fighting. Then a few days later, 3 internees escaped from the prison camp, and they were Pete Miles, Ben Edwards, and Fred Zervalukas. And they reported into division headquarters, and Colonel Mueller interviewed them, and they were able to give, well, Pete Miles in particular was able to give more detailed information about the gun emplacements, the guards, and all the details of the prison camp, since he'd been incarcerated there. So then Colonel Mueller called Lieutenant Scow, who in turn called me, and so we went back over there to determine that what these escaped internees stated was in fact true. And by and large it was, because Pete Miles was an engineer, and he had an engineer's mind. And so this time we were more thorough. We had to make a tour surrounding the entire camp to make sure that where these gun emplacements were, and corrected any changes that Pete Miles had given Colonel Mueller. So then after we determined the veracity of what Pete Miles had said, we went back and confirmed to Colonel Mueller that by and large everything was as Pete Miles had detailed. So then they made a sketch of the camp and the various machine gun pillboxes and what have you, guard posts. And so then General Swing tasked the reconnaissance platoon of the 11th Airborne, and as I stated previously, it was a provisional unit. But we were his eyes and ears. And so they came up with a plan that it would be essential for the reconnaissance platoon to be in place by 0700 on the 23rd of February, 1945, so that when the first parachutes opened up, that we could kill all the guards on duty, the posted guards, which there were approximately 50 in various pillboxes and bunkers and what have you. And so we departed in 3 bunkers across Laguna de Bay, and two of the bunkers made it that night, on the night of the 21st. But the 3rd bunker was delayed because it broke. That was a larger bunker. It contained about 12 of the reconers. There were only 22 of us in the platoon at that time, and it carried the extra food and ammunition, grenades that we thought we might need.
Are you saying the total attacking force was only 22 men?
22 men from the recon platoon, but we were to be joined up with the guerrilla units.
Okay.
So 2 of us, the first bunker with Lieutenant Scow and what we call the headquarters group of the platoon, left first. We didn't all leave at once because it would be too obvious if we had, so we left at various intervals. The first one left, and then the bunker I was in left. And so I told the helmsman, the Filipino helmsman, exactly what to say in case we were stopped or challenged. Because in the middle of Laguna de Bay, and Laguna de Bay was a big inland body of water, was an island called Calamba, which housed Japanese patrol boats. But we knew from information from the guerrillas that the patrol boats did not venture out during the daytime because they could see, but at nighttime they'd venture out, and so we had to be careful.
So let me ask you, go back, did y'all start your journey across at night, or?
At night.
Okay, were you in uniform, or?
We were in fatigue. Yeah, we were in uniform, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I didn't wear a steel helmet. I wore a fatigue cap, something like a baseball cap.
But I was just curious, if they had come up on you and seen you in fatigues, wouldn't they know that you were military?
They could, but then, we see, these are large dugout canoes, so we duck down.
Oh, I see.
And the helmsman, I was back there with the helmsman, and I told the helmsman of our banca that exactly what to say. We were fishing, late getting back, and it was a pretty calm night, and we were becalmed, and then I also cautioned him that I understand, I was speaking to him in Tagalog, so you know that I understand what you're going to say. Don't speak anything but Tagalog. If they don't understand, that's their problem. But if you don't say what I say, you'll be the first one I'll kill. So they challenged us. They didn't stop us, they challenged us. And he told them exactly what I told him to tell them. So they didn't come any closer. They let us go. So the two of the bunkers, with about 10 men, made it, 10 men from the recon platoon made it across. But the third and larger bunker, due to a broken rudder, was delayed because they had to have the rudder fixed. So then they started out. By the time they started out, it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning, on the 22nd, morning of the 22nd. And they became becalmed. So they floated around, poor guys, all day long under the hot sun, ducked underneath so they wouldn't be spotted until a breeze came up. And then they finally made it to where we were, about, I would say about 3 o'clock that afternoon of the 22nd. And about 10 o'clock on the same, 10 o'clock at night of the 22nd, we all had to leave for our designated positions surrounding the camp, because on the morning of the 23rd was H hour.
And how far again were you from this camp when you?
At that time, about 10 miles. We had to walk 10 miles overland, skirting listening posts and outposts. And as a matter of fact, the last listening post we came across was a little shack. And I peeked in like this, and here was this guard with a telephone, sound asleep. So, we let him sleep, because if I killed him and they called him, they'd send a patrol out to find out why he wasn't answering. So we just let him sleep, and so went on our way. And so it took us about, we left at 10 o'clock, but we had to go through flooded rice paddies and had to be quiet in the process. So it took us, we left at 10 o'clock, and by the time we arrived, it was about 6:45, and H hour was 0700. And we just came up from this deep gully, up over this gully, and which then there was about 75 yards of open space that we had to go across in order to attack the machine gun pillboxes.
And all during this 10 miles, you had to carry weapons and ammunition?
Well, we carried everything, yeah. So that's what took us so long. And so about 3 minutes before 0700, I could hear the planes. Somebody opened fire. And I'm sure it was a guerrilla, because later on I found out that. Because for one thing, it sounded like a Nambu light machine gun, a Japanese light machine gun, and they had a very peculiar staccato to it. It was equivalent to our BAR, but it was a hopper-fed automatic weapon, 25 caliber, and in this hopper they put in these 5-round clips that the Japanese Arasaki rifles used, also 25 caliber. So that way they could use the rifle clips for the machine guns as well. And because of the 5-round clips, they fired in 5-round bursts. And if you recall the Woody Woodpecker song, it goes, you know, it was the staccato, the five-round beat, and that's why we call it the woodpecker. But anyway, this 5-round burst went off, and later on, I found out that I suspected it was a guerrilla that opened fire. But then it was confirmed when later on, after it was over, I found out that a guerrilla had fired at what he thought was a wild animal. But anyway, so then this was about 3 minutes before 0700. And so since that machine gun fired off 5 rounds, so we had no choice but to prematurely attack our assigned machine gun pillboxes. Well, you know, the 5-round burst going off alerted the gunners, and so they saw us coming, and we had about 75 yards of open ground to cover. The first burst wounded 2 of our guys, and Vince Call was hit in the shoulder, and Larry Botkin was hit in the nose by a ricochet. So then that left the other 2 of us, and so we were able to knock out the 2 machine guns. But after we did that, but by this time the paratroopers from B Company had already jumped, and so then another machine gun opened up, which was under this big tree, and they had one of our guys pinned down. I didn't know which one, but I could tell by the M1 rifle going off that it was one of our guys. So I saw this gully which led up to that tree. I went this gully and threw a couple of grenades there, and then that machine gun didn't fire anymore. So then that's when I found out it was Larry that was pinned down. His nose was bleeding, but he was okay. He just died here about 5 years ago from cancer. And so we then entered the camp. In the meantime, the other elements of our platoon had already entered the camp, and because they had so much trouble getting the prisoners to leave. See, you know, they want to run back and get all their belongings, meager as they were. It was their sole possession. But we couldn't wait for the simple reason that about 8 miles away was the Japanese Tiger Division, about 8,000 to 10,000 men, and so we knew that we had to get them out of there. So Cliff Town, who lives in Pleasanton, Kansas, set fire to the first barracks. So, but when B Company came up from the drop zone, when Lieutenant Ringler, who commanded B Company, saw the first barracks afire, he figured burn the whole camp down. So they set fire to the rest of the barracks, and then by that time the Amtrak came up from the beach landing zone.
Now, let me go back on this. How did the Amtrak? How did they get assured that it was?
Well, Amtraks they're waterborne. They can go on land or water.
Okay, where did they come from?
They came from Muntinlupa, from our side of the lines.
Okay.
And came across the water, and 2 of our guys, Len Hahn and Jim Bruce, marked the beach landing zone. 2 of our other guys, Leo Sapp and Bill Taylor, marked the drop zone, so that the planes could see where the drop zone was.
Okay.
So anyway, by this time, the Amtraks had come ashore and come into the camp, so that we could load the weakest of the men and all the women and children, and then they started heading out. and they had to make 2 trips to evacuate everyone. And the ones that were able to walk, while we escorted them out of the camp and towards the beach. And I was just talking to one of the internees from Los Baños, and he said he walked. And I said, well, I don't know if you realize it, but we acted as flank guards and rear guards, to protect you while you were walking. Of course, he didn't realize that. Of course, you don't expect him to understand that. Correct. And so, in the meantime, the camp is burning, and fortunately, there was not one prisoner killed. Out of 2,147, not one was killed. And by the way, 11 of the 2,147 were Navy nurses. The only female naval officers ever to be incarcerated as POWs.
Wow. That is something.
Yeah, and this is a little known fact. But, and anticipating all of this, after the able-bodied were able to walk, and were able to walk from the encampment to the beach landing zone, which was about not quite 2 miles. Then we acted as flank and rear guard to protect them. But the Amtrak had to make 2 trips because they could not carry everyone and all the equipment that they brought. See, they brought the Amtrak when they came. They brought 2 companies of the 1st Battalion of the 511th. One company jumped, B Company. So they brought in A and C companies and elements of the one battery of the 457 parachute field artillery. So they had to get all, and those of us who were already there, we all had to be evacuated. So I caught the last Amtrak out of there. But in the meantime, to answer your question, what prevented the Japanese Tiger Division from swooping down on the camp? And the Colonel Mueller and the planners, planning staff of the division, assigned one battalion, the 1st Battalion of the 188th Regiment of the 11th Airborne, to act as a blocking force. And they had attached artillery units and a tank destroyer battalion. And their job was to prevent the Japanese reinforcements from coming down to the camp. And not many people are aware of that, but they deserve a lot of credit.
Sure do.
As a matter of fact, they suffered the only 2 deaths.
There were only 2 people killed in this whole operation?
Yeah.
Soldiers? That is unbelievable.
So it was deemed a rousing success by General MacArthur anyway.
Okay. And then after you picked these people up, you took them behind the American lines?
Yeah, took them to our lines, and they had a hospital and a kitchen set up at what's called New Bilibid Prison, at a place called Muntinlupa. And so the Amtrak landed at Muntinlupa, and trucks then carried them for the 8 or 10 miles from Muntinlupa to New Bilibid prison, where they were, housed and clothed and fed and what have you.
Okay. Tell us then what else happened to you after this was complete.
Well, let's see. By the time the last Amtrak left, it was about 5:30, 6 o'clock that night. So by the time we arrived at New Bilibid prison, where the internees were, and other elements of the various Army units, doctors and what have you. Well, it was about 9 o'clock by the time we arrived at New Bilibid, and I can still remember the internees that were healthy lined up, and as we walked down, They all gave us
Big hand.
yeah, big hand. So then we stayed. There, we got our first hot meal in weeks that night, and so but we had to leave early the next morning because we were assigned other missions.
You want to talk about those?
Well, I don't. Well, we then had to go towards. The plan was to recapture Cavite, the U.S. naval base. So we went on a patrol to determine the enemy strength in and about Cavite, and then from there we spread out down into the southern part of Luzon. As a matter of fact, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but elements of the 158th Regimental Combat Team, the Bushmasters, were assigned to the 11th Airborne. The 19th Infantry Regiment of the 24th Division was assigned to the 11th Airborne. I know because I led each of these units into the forward areas, or what we used to call the line of departure. And then the 8th Cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division was also attached to the 11th Airborne for the assault at Mount Mulimpuno.
Okay. Let me just ask you one thing now. This, as you say, was quite a feat, to say the least. How many people, that is, the military people and these people that you rescued, have you had contact with since then?
Well, I've attended every one of their reunions, the internees from Los Baños, since 1980. And they used to have it every 5 years. And so 1980 was the 35th anniversary. 1985 was the 40th. 1995 was the 50th. And so I've attended. Then in 1999 we had a reunion in San Diego, and I gave a little talk in San Diego, and a lot of they recognized me, the internees, and said, you gave a talk in San Diego, and it was a good talk. And
What month is your birthday? You told me, and I forgot.
October the 10th, 10/10.
So this October 10th, you're going to be 81 years old.
Yeah.
You're a very, very young-looking 81 years old.
You know what my standard answer to that is?
No.
No minor vices.
No minor vices.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Santos, I don't know anything else to ask you. Is there anything else you would like to add to this?
Yes, I'd like to, as a footnote, not many people are aware of the fact that a radio operator from the 511 Signal Company, a part of the 11th Airborne Division, by the name of John Fulton, was behind the lines for the Los Baños operation approximately 10 days to 2 weeks before the 23rd. And he should be given a lot of credit. He and I are still in touch with each other.
What was his main job when I didn't find out?
Well, he was a radio operator, so he was a sergeant radio operator. His job was to send back information, any pertinent information to division headquarters.
Just keep you updated.
Yeah, keep Colonel Mueller updated on any developments.
I understand that after this happened, the Japanese executed a lot of the people there.
Well, I've heard that. Although we were assigned, we went on a patrol into that area, and personally, I saw no evidence of it.
Could I just heard the surface?
But yes, I've heard that too.
Well, if there's anything else you would like to say, we'd like to hear it too.
Well, yes, there's another incident when we were tasked to go to Okinawa. My buddy Martin Squires and I were on this plane, C-47, ready to take off. And just about that time, Lieutenant Scow, who who was our platoon leader for the Los Baños operation, but was since reassigned to division headquarters, stuck his head into the plane, and he saw me. He said, "Hey, Terry." This officer, you know, I don't remember his name, but by you and Squires getting off, we'd like to get, you know, get up to Okinawa. Fine, I don't care. So I got off and he got on. Well, as luck would have it, that plane crashed at Naha during an air, because they were trying to land during an air raid, and all hands on board were killed. So, you know, indirectly and inadvertently, he saved my life.
That's true. It's very true. That is it. It's quite a story.
You know, that's just one of those misfortunes or fortunes of war. So it was sad, but better him than me.
Well, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything else?
That's about all.
But on behalf of the Nimitz Museum, we'd sure like to thank you and appreciate you giving this information to us, because it'll really be a very important thing.
And if I left out any gaps, do you have any questions, Lloyd? Feel free to drop me a line and